Paul Prang had been working as a law enforcement officer for over a decade, but he had never encountered anything like this before. He was tasked with finding and catching illegal dumpers in the Texarkana area, which meant he had to travel deep into the woods and forests. His job required him to be well-equipped and ready for any situation, so he always carried his trusty AR-15 rifle and a headlamp for his flashlight. As he walked towards the illegal dumping ground, he could feel the unease creeping up his spine. The air was thick with the stench of rotting meat, and the forest was eerily quiet. Paul knew that he had to stay alert and keep his wits about him, so he kept his finger on the trigger of his AR-15. As Paul walked further into the forest, he could feel an uneasy feeling building in the pit of his stomach. He had been in many dangerous situations before, but something about the dense darkness of the forest seemed to be different. It was as if something was watching him, stalking him from the shadows. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound coming from behind him. He spun around, pointing his rifle at the source of the noise, but there was nothing there. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Paul tried to shake off the feeling of unease and continued walking. But the silence of the forest was only broken by the sound of his footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. No animals roamed around, no crickets chirping, nothing. The smell of decay grew stronger as Paul approached the illegal dumping ground. He could see the silhouettes of the dead animals strewn around, and his headlamp illuminated the sight of their torn and ripped bodies. But what he couldn't see was what had caused this destruction. He turned on his headlamp and shone it into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was stalking him. But all he saw was the trees, and the shadows that danced around them. Paul knew that he had to be careful. He was alone in the middle of the forest, with nothing but his gun and his wits to protect him. As he approached the center of the dumping ground, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a low growl, but it didn't sound like any animal he had ever encountered. It was as if something inhuman was making the noise. Paul tightened his grip on his rifle and slowly turned around, scanning the area with his headlamp. But there was nothing there. He was alone, or so he thought. Out of nowhere, something slammed into Paul from behind, knocking him to the ground. He could feel a pair of sharp claws digging into his flesh as he struggled to break free. Adrenaline surged through his body, and he fought back with all his strength. With one hand, he tried to push the Skinwalker off him, while with the other, he reached into his pocket for his knife. Paul managed to free his knife and plunged it into the creature's side. It let out a blood-curdling screech and retreated into the shadows. Paul quickly got to his feet, scanning the area with his headlamp. Paul searching around for his AR-15, and he quickly snatched his AR from the ground. Paul scrambled to his feet, rifle at the ready, and aimed it at the Skinwalker. But the creature was already on the move, darting around him with blinding speed. Paul spun around, trying to keep the Skinwalker in his sights, but it was like trying to shoot a ghost. He could see the creature's shape in the darkness, but it was always just out of reach. Suddenly, he heard the Skinwalker howling in fury, and he knew that it was about to attack again. He braced himself for impact, rifle at the ready, and waited for the creature to strike. As it lunged towards him, he fired his rifle, the sound echoing through the forest. But the Skinwalker was too quick, and it dodged out of the way. Paul cursed under his breath and tried to reload his rifle, but the Skinwalker was already on him again. It slammed into him with incredible force, knocking him to the ground once more. He could feel its claws tearing at his flesh, but this time, he was ready. With a swift motion, he drew his knife and plunged it into the Skinwalker's. "Die! Dang it!" Paul screamed. He stabbed it again and again. The creature let out a howl of pain, and Paul could feel its hot breath on his face. He wrestled with it, trying to push it away, but it was too strong. With a final burst of energy, he pulled the knife out of the creature's side and plunged it into its heart. The Skinwalker let out a final, pitiful howl before collapsing on the ground. Breathless and bleeding, Paul staggered to his feet and looked around the forest. Suddenly, the Skinwalker launched itself up into the trees and began moving quickly away from Paul. He watched in amazement as it disappeared into the darkness, still feeling the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He knew that he had narrowly escaped death. Paul, whisper. Oh. Snap.